So how do we do this? Think of attributions as citing sources moving forward. What you know as citing sources is making attributions in the academic world. And so when you see a comment from me on your paper, or maybe a professor in another class, a higher level class may point out a paper saying, where is your attribution? I want you to know what that means. An attribution is the way that you're citing your source. It's the backbone of academic knowledge. What you will find is that any style guide handles this the same way. There will be in-text citations or within your document where you are signaling the use of a certain external source that's not your own. It belongs to someone else. That in-text citation is referring to a source that you will include in your references list at the end of your paper. And that reference citation lists all of the specific minute details of how someone can find the specific page number, date, journal, volume number, all of the details for how to locate the source. And so the in-text citation signals the reader to refer to the references list to be able to find the full information. And they're different. It depends on the source as to how you make a reference citation, and it depends on the source and the number of authors as to how you make the in-text citation. Either way it goes, when you're citing your sources in your text, you're making an attribution. I'm going to show you the ways that we do that, and then I'm going to show you how you start learning to make citations based on the sources you're using. You make attributions or citations when you are using an idea that is not your own. So if you are pulling in a quote, if you're paraphrasing an idea from a study, anytime you're using knowledge that is not your own, you will need to make an attribution and give credit where it's due. It's not a problem to it's not a problem to cite sources multiple times throughout your paragraph. In fact, most research papers, every 2 to 3 sentences is going to cite a source. It's very common. And I'm actually going to provide a sample research paper so you can see how sources are cited, how often they're cited. It's very normal. You're not going to have one citation every paragraph. You're going to have multiple citations within a paragraph, because the idea is we're analyzing all this information. We're bringing in all of this credible information into our research, and we want to signal to the reader that we have done that. We've analyzed these sources. We know them to be true and credible and reliable and logical, and we're incorporating that into our argument to make a point for us to support our claims. And so when we do that, we're bolstering our own ethos, pathos, and logos, or modes of appeals. Attributions are extremely important. Citing your sources are extremely important. This is one of those areas in which you can't mess around. You have to learn how to look this information up and know how to do it. So we're starting with ideas that have already been established by others to build on them and develop into our own ideas. So again, I've already touched on that, really making our own unique argument we're making for ourselves in our research papers, distinguished from other ideas that already exist in the academic conversation about that topic. And then our references list, what most people always call a bibliography or something like that. It's always a references list. In APA, it's always just called references. That provides the address for others to follow so they can refer back to those ideas and reference the sources, the primary, secondary, tertiary, whichever level of source that you're using. Let's talk about how we do this specifically. One way is to make an attribution or to cite with a verb. All instances of referring to a source in academic writing will always only use the author's last name. No matter what type of source it is, if an author is present, it will always be only the last name that you use to refer to that source. So in this particular excerpt, Murphy is the last name of the author, and then you will have the year. You always put the year of the publication after the author's last name. So this is a way that not a lot of people know how to make attributions, but Murphy, 1991, points out that in the first half of the 19th century, people worked hard to spread information about how to prevent disease, but did not emphasize how to treat diseases. Page number 141. This might look a little bit different than the in-text citations that you normally see at the end of a sentence, where all of this is kind of put in its own set of parentheses. It's separated. The page number is pulled out to the end of the sentence, and you have the year at the beginning as it is kind of combined with the verb of the sentence. Author's last name, year of publication, points out. Now, keep in mind, and this takes practice, it takes just learning and working with sources. You'll notice that points out, the verb that's utilizing that source, whenever we refer to what an author says or does, it's usually always in present tense, which is different than a lot of people have been taught. We want to say, intuition tells us Murphy pointed out that because the writing happened in the past, right? However, in academic writing, we always use present tense unless the situation refers to a previous point in time. So if it's just a generalized idea, an abstract idea, we always use that present tense. Murphy points out, not pointed, that in the first half, yada, 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 and then you include your page number. So this is one way to make an attribution with a verb, author, year, verb. This is very common. In fact, this is a good way to start paragraphs. When you start a new paragraph in your writing, make an attribution with the verb. It's an excellent way to make the sentences seem natural and to make the introduction or topic sentence of a paragraph flow really well while making a citation at the same time. Part of making contact with your audience is varying the way that you present your ideas, your sentences, but also how you cite your sources. If you constantly put a citation at the end of every few sentences, there's very little variation there, and that doesn't flow well. And the reader picks up on that because it's sentence, citation, and it creates a very choppy type of rhythm. So if you learn how to make a citation in a different way, say, for instance, the beginning of a sentence in this instance, then you're changing up that flow of writing. It makes your reader more engaged. It's more flowing and dynamic and natural. So this is one way to do it. You can also title attribution with a verb. In this instance, The Diary of a Nursing Sister on the Western Front, 1915, describes how soldiers were wounded so badly that nurses could not treat their blood loss quickly enough. NP, which refers to no page number. It's the same idea, except instead of using the author's last name, you're using the title of the source and then the publication date. The rest remains the same. Describes, you'll notice how that verbiage is still in present tense. The only difference here is this particular source didn't have a page number, so it's probably on a website or it's something similar as to where there's no specific page number, and in that case it's pointed out that there was no page number at the end instead of denoting the page number. So we can attribute with the author's last name and the year and a verb, or we can also do that with a title of the document and or the source and a verb. It's still very similar. I do want to also point out, let me back up here. I don't know if it's even going to let me. I'm going to have to zoom out and then go back this way. One thing I want to point out is that you'll notice in these types of instances and these citations and attributions that we're looking at in these slides, you'll notice, say for instance, the title here, you'll see that only the first letter of the first word is capitalized. The way that we capitalize our titles are all based on style. APA tells us that certain sources use certain capitalization rules. So you're not going to capitalize every word of a title like you've been taught to do, because the APA style guide tells us to do differently based on what a source is. So I'm going to show you the way to do this. The main realization here is that there are so many nitpicky rules. There are so many specific ways that you have to cite your sources based on what the sources are, the title, how many authors, so many details. It is literally impossible for any human being to understand and memorize those things. And so it really becomes a method of looking up how to do this and where to find the information to accurately capitalize a title or make a citation. And so you're never going to understand or memorize how to do this. I'm in my 15th, 20th year of professional publication, and I still cannot tell you how to do all of that firsthand. You have to look it up. You have to look at the style guide and some references that show you how you cite something depending on what it is, how you capitalize something based on what it is. And so I'll show you how to do that, but I just wanted to point that out because this is going to seem very nuanced. It's going to be seem very specific. It's nothing that you're going to be able to memorize. The idea is to know how to find the resources that show you how to do it. Text citations, I've already talked about this, signals the reliance on a source that's coming to an end. The preceding section is content directly coming from that particular source. So if you make an attribution at the beginning of the sentence, anything in that particular sentence that's coming following the punctuation or the period is isolated to that source. It's attributed to that author that made that point, or the owner of that intellectual property. If it is a citation that comes at the end of a sentence, then anything in that preceding content, in that preceding sentence, is intellectual property belonging to that source. The author of Into the Wind calculated the benefits of wind-powered turbines, but he didn't discuss whether turbines harm wildlife. Author, year. This is the most common in-text citation you see. If you're not attributing or making an attribution with a title or the author's first name at the beginning of a sentence, likely your in-text citation is going to fall to the end of the sentence. And it always includes the author's last name, comma. You have to have the comma. You have to have the last name. You have to have the parentheses. And the year that the source was published. And then end parentheses. Something that a lot of people are not familiar with is, how do I end a sentence with a source? Does my punctuation go outside? Does it go at the end of the sentence? It's always going to go at the end of your citation. So think of it this way. Your period is going to be the end point for your entire sentence and your citation. So in this instance, the author's last name is Gertner, and the year of publication was 2013. And this is a paraphrase instance. It's not a verbatim quote. You're not taking a quote directly from the source. This is someone who is taking the ideas and paraphrasing them in some kind of way, and then including the attribution to give them credit with a period afterward. I've already talked about this. In-text citation, it's the signal or attribution. It's the signaling of a use of a source that's not your own, and then it's signaling the reader to look at the reference citation or the full address of each source that's being used in your text. It's a references page at the end of the text. I think I've linked this. Let me see if I can pull this up. I think it's still relevant. These are just some baseline. Here it is. This is what I wanted to show you. This is what a references page in APA format looks like. So we looked at what your in-text citations look like. Those in-text citations are going to direct your reader to the references page. This should be in bold print, by the way. At the very end of your research paper that lists all of the details of the sources you're going to be using. And it's always in this same format. You'll notice that each citation starts at a certain point. Every other line other than the first is indented, and that helps us understand where a second source is coming in. And they're always in alphabetical order. The first thing you'll notice when you look at this reference list is how much detail is involved. You're going to see so many different pieces of information. And the reality is that each of these sources, while there's an author, a title, maybe there's not an author, they're all different types of sources. They're videos, they're podcasts, they're dissertations, they're academic journals. So many different types of sources, and you cite them in different ways. Your in-text citations are similar. You make them the same way based on author and year. But these reference citations, you really have to look up how to cite this. You have to look up what format do I put each of these in based on what type of source it is and what type of information is there for me to use. And so you have to train yourself on knowing how to locate that information. to be able to cite that. It takes practice. It's something you're not going to memorize, and that's the first point I want to make. You will never memorize how to do this. You have to know how to look at